and how values can change depending on the community that you are in.
First as a Black woman, and then as a defense attorney.
You care about defending
their process because there's an obvious group of people, that distinct group that is missing.
That language that you should be using, because that's what the law says.
Currently, because of the overwhelming media coverage, any potential juror may have already formed an opinion about the case.
Members of the jury, welcome to 2026 Jury Duty Unmasked. Portia Chiffon, how you doing?
I'm holding steady. How you doing? How y'all doing out there?
Yes, indeed. Shout out to Miriam Troy. 2026, she changed up the music on the
Right? That was a surprise. Hey.
I love it. Welcome, everyone. We are the Juror Project, and we are here to do a couple of things this evening. We'll tell you a little bit more about the Juror Project, and we're going to have conversations about two cases that have been in the news. People have been having conversations. Involves young man named Keith Porter, who was killed by an ICE agent in Los Angeles, and then Nicole Renee Good in Minneapolis, also killed by an ICE agent. And we're gonna have a conversation about what that looks like, what it's supposed to look like. Have a conversation about vigilantism. And then we're going to be taking questions from you because we are all in this country together. So what is going on? And what Portia Chiffon and I will censure what role the jury play to present a system that my colleague Quinlan says call it. Yeah, we can talk about that. We also want to honor. Pioneer.
Will, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you.
Well, that's not good.
We need them to hear everything you're gonna say.
And I'll see if I can adjust something.
Remember y'all last time Will left the room? Oh, I think just because he's on mute don't mean he can't hear me, right? He can hear me. Hi. Hey.
Better?
Not any better, Portia?
Yeah, you better now.
Okay. We want to give a shout out to Claudette Colvin. When we think about pioneers of our civil rights movement, and specifically we think about pioneers coming out of Montgomery, Alabama. We don't give enough credit to Claudette Colvin. And when you think about what she did at a very young age, refusing to give her seat up to a white passenger, she had courage that a lot of us didn't having at that age. And as many of you know, when there are civil rights cases, there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of intentionality in terms of who is the plaintiff in which we're bringing the case on behalf of. And Claudette Colvin did not fit the perspective that the attorneys thought would position the issue of segregated transportation in Montgomery in the most positive light. They were concerned about her being a young mother. They were concerned about her being not being married. So they ultimately ended up Rosa Parks participating in this act of civil disobedience, and ultimately Rosa Parks often gets the recognition for the role in the Montgomery bus boycott, but we want to make sure Claudette Colvin gets her flowers as well, as she has transitioned to join other ancestors.
Absolutely, Will. May she rest. May she rest. You know, it's interesting. I know this wasn't sort of on the agenda for us to talk about, but what that made me realize, while I do, as an attorney, respect and appreciate strategy, it really does make me think about sort of wealth and proximity and how we're treated in the criminal legal system, right? And yeah, and the difference, depending on who you are, who you know, and what you have, and sort of how you are treated. And so, even in life, she ruffled feathers in all the right ways. Even when there was a decision not to go with her, as a plaintiff, she understood the bigger picture. So a forever shout out to her. May she rest.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What's the Juror Project, Portia? Tell me all about it.
I mean, besides our overall dopeness, the Juror Project is your brainchild. I often describe it as an organization that, just sort of in a nutshell, has one main umbrella goal, and that is to create a legal system worthy of its name, as you always say, right? And we really want to ensure that we have a system that is rooted in justice and fairness, right? And we go around the country, we go into communities, and we teach community members about the power of their voice in that jury box, the importance of jury service. But we also train lawyers, right, and how to harness their power, because not everybody has the ability and power to go into a courtroom and speak. And so we want to make sure that both community members and our comrades in this struggle are well equipped to engage this criminal legal system in a fair way, so that our community members really do believe in this process.
Absolutely. Our jury should reflect our communities, simply put.
Always.
And our work is dedicated to making sure our communities are actually reflected in the juries, because there's so much power in people, and we want to make sure people have access to that power.
That's a dope shirt, Will.
Thank you.
Speaking of people power.
I gotta turn around because you gotta see the back.
Please. Oh, that's really dope. That's a dope shirt.
My friend Zoe Towns at forward.us gave me this.
I know that's right. Shout out to them.
You know Zoe as well.
But here we are. We are.
Yes.
I am gonna try something real quick. Portia, can you tell me about why we do these Instagram lives? And I'm gonna change my microphone real quick.
Absolutely. So while Will is changing his microphone, I'm just going to take over and do my own thing. I'm kidding. I'm going to do exactly what he asked me to do, which is he listening? Okay, he going. So we do these Instagram lives because we believe that an informed citizen is an informed juror, right? And tonight, I don't know if you can figure it out with me and Will's tone, but we're going to be talking about the deaths of both Keith Porter and Renee Good. Now, while Will is changing his microphone and figuring out the sound issue, I'm actually going to get into the facts of the Renee Good case. But quite frankly, though, before I get into the facts of the Renee Good case, I just want to make a distinction. I want to make a distinction between what ICE is employed to do and what police officers are employed to do. Will's back. ICE agents, right? A huge part of why they are going into communities and fucking shit up is because we forget that the role of an ICE agent and the role of law enforcement are somewhat different, right? ICE agents are literally charged with the duty of enforcing customs, right? They're charged with the duty of making sure that individuals who did not go through the formal process to get into this country are sent back to their country. They are not rooted or versed in community policing, like police officers are supposed to be, right? So when they're coming into our communities, they're coming into our communities with a very specific purpose. And it is not to engage the community in an empathetic way. It is not to engage the community in a humane way. It is a grab and go situation. Law enforcement, police officers that come into our community are supposed to be trained to do that, right? To de escalate, to try to understand, to have compassion, to have empathy, and to use their discretion. And so I thought that it was important to draw that distinction at the very beginning of our conversation, so that we are all operating with the same level of understanding. Well, I was just talking to our community about the difference between what the role of ICE agents is and what the role of other law enforcement agencies when they're coming into our communities, particularly police officers, and why we see, and don't get me wrong, over forever we have not seen much of a difference in how police officers engage in our community and how ICE agents have been engaging, but I do want to just make a distinction about what their roles actually are.
I appreciate that.
Welcome back, Will.
Thanks. I don't know if the sound is any better, but I hope so. Is it the same?
It's a little better for me.
How about this?
Oh, you raw dogging it. No mic. All right, let's go.
I don't know if that's any better, but we'll see. So we think
It's
about
better.
law enforcement. We think about ICE and police and the mandates and the charges they have. They're very different. So when law enforcement shows up, they have a different type of training in how to engage community. But when ICE shows up, they don't have that similar training. And what we're seeing is engaging with the American people in ways they just have not been trained to engage. People are dying as a result. I know we're going to talk about Keith Porter and David Colbert. So I'm happy to kick off the background relating to Keith Porter's case. So I want to take us all back to December 31st. New Year's Eve. People celebrate in different ways. And Keith Porter has a gun and he's shooting his gun in the air. The off-duty ICE agent who's in his apartment comes out with his gun from his apartment and sees Keith Porter shooting his gun, celebrating the New Year. And instead of calling the police, reporting it in, he takes matters into his own hands and shoots and kills Keith Porter. In most instances, there will be a body camera. There's interactions with members of the community. But we don't have that here. This is an off-duty officer who took matters into his own hand. He ended up providing what he thought was the appropriate response, although accounts from witnesses in the area discussed that Keith Porter was not shooting his gun at anybody. That he wasn't, it was not an active shooter situation. And for this ICE agent to not provide due process, to not provide notice, to not provide calling the police for the police to do their job, right? This is an officer who is trained in engaging in ICE-related functions. We just didn't have that yet. And we're not seeing the normal interaction between law enforcement and members of the community. And unfortunately, we have a father. We have a young black man. I think he was 43. No longer with us.
Well, for those individuals that are in this community who are not familiar with due process, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So due process, there's two kinds. We have something called substantive due process and something called procedural due process. What we're talking about here is procedural due process. Due process stands for this notion that before the government can take away one of your fundamental rights, we're talking about life, liberty, property, and the things that extend from those overarching themes, they have to have a good reason to try to take away one of those fundamental rights. And then if we're talking about procedural due process, if the government's trying to take away one of those rights, they have to give you notice that, hey, we're going to be taking away your life, we're going to be taking away your liberty, or we're going to be taking away your property. And then you have to be given an opportunity to be heard. So the government is trying to take away my liberty in the instance that they're trying to charge me with the crime, they're trying to throw me in prison. They have to give me notice. So they have to officially charge me with some type of a crime. And then my opportunity to be heard would be going to court, hiring a lawyer, having a lawyer appointed to me, having motions hearings, having case conferences, and ultimately having a trial if that's how I want to challenge these allegations from the government. Keith Porter never got that privilege. Keith Porter was never given notice. Keith Porter was never given an opportunity to be heard. Instead, what ended up happening is this off-duty ICE agent comes running out of his house, trying to be Captain Save-A-Ho, and just starts shooting and kills him, right? Doesn't ask questions, doesn't say, hey, what are you doing? Doesn't try to engage or de-escalate, none of that. The things that we would see with a trained police officer who's been trained in de-escalation and who can have some context clues. It's New Year's Eve. And before we can even get to whether or not Keith Porter was committing a crime, this ICE agent was judge, jury, and executioner all in that moment.
Can you think of other high-profile cases where individuals have been seamlessly brought in without being murdered, who were not Black men?
Many of us remember this individual who walked into a church and killed numerous Black people praying in that church. His name is Dylan Roof. He was a young white man who had just murdered all these people in this church. And these people welcomed him into the church, right? And as the police were responding to this murderous scene and trying to find the shooter who actually committed that crime, when they approached Dylan Roof, they didn't shoot him on sight, even after they had the knowledge this person just killed a bunch of people. The way that they approached Dylan Roof, right, the way that they engaged him, the way that they apprehended him did not come at the cost of his life. And in fact, as part of bringing him into custody, they stopped and got him some fast food on the way to the jail. So when we think about why members of the Black community get so frustrated when we are being provided these examples of two different types of the justice system, we can talk about Keith Porter and how he was not charged with killing somebody. He was not charged with being or suspected of being a mass shooter, right? And the way that this off-duty ICE agent comes and just kills him on scene. And then we compare that to Dylan Roof, who had just killed a bunch of people in a church, and the police were aware of the murders that he had just committed, and they approach him with these soft, rosy white gloves. And so it's a double standard, and it's coming at the cost of people's lives. And what we're seeing is we just want due process at the minimum, right? We think about the lynch mob. We think about vigilantism. We think about people taking things into their own hands. This is an example of that. Yes, this ICE agent may be an ICE agent during the day, and he has a particular job responsibilities during the day, but that does not mean he's the person who should be responding to somebody lighting their or shooting their gun off on the evening of New Year's Eve and ultimately killing somebody.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. You know, it's interesting. I know we haven't gotten back to. I know we haven't gotten to the facts of the Renee Good case, but I do think it's interesting how we have sort of slid into this sort of practice of inhumanity, of going into people's homes and going into people's communities and just beating them. I mean, there were videos of agents just just going into communities to rebel rouse. But anyway, before I go off on my angry tangent, we do have a question, Will, in the chat. Do they present these cases to police officers during trainings?
I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar with what the trainings of police officers are receiving, right? But we're not talking about a police officer per se. We're talking about an ICE agent. So we have to maintain that distinction. ICE officers are not trained in instances of de-escalation and interacting with the community. They're really just saying, we see somebody committing a crime, and we're not going to be providing due process. We're just going to make our decision right here and there, right now and then. And it's really frustrating. Especially as somebody who's trying to teach law students about this concept of due process. And when we see these examples in the news day after day after day, I can teach them one thing in terms of what our Constitution prescribes, and then we have the reality of the United States of America as another thing that needs to be taught. So I don't think this is part of their trainings, at least for ICE agents. I don't know what ICE agents are being trained on, but it's clearly not how to engage with the community, considering the number of people that have died at their hands.
I am familiar with police trainings because I have to be familiar with the patrol guide for work. And police officers, specifically in New York, go through the 6 months in the police academy. And in the police academy training, they are trained to de-escalate. They are trained to even take, some of the expletives that community members say to them. They are supposed to be going in as mediators to some situations, but we as community members and oftentimes police officers forget about that training when we are on the street and we are talking to our community members. For some reason, some way, somehow, particularly in Black and brown communities, that training gets lost. Will, there is a comment that I think that we should address. And that comment says, most people are guilty until proven innocent. I have thoughts. What say you, Director?
Interestingly, I worked on a case that was featured in a documentary, and the documentary was called Guilty Until Proven Guilty. So this idea that we do not have this presumption of innocence, or when we do have a presumption of innocence, it isn't applied equally across the board. But I agree with the comment, right? We have too many examples where people are presumed to be guilty and they have to be proven innocent. And that's not how our system is designed. The burden does not rest or lie with the person who has been accused of a crime. It is the accuser, the state, the prosecution, the government that has the burden of proof. If you're going to say I committed a crime, you better be able to prove it, right? Otherwise, don't come with your case half-baked. Do your investigation, bring legitimate charges. And before a prosecutor can even screen a case, we have ICE agents who aren't even allowing for that process to take place, for that burden to be met, for that case to be proved. And Keith Porter and Renee Good's cases and their killings are unfortunately really, really sad examples of this very premise that the comment is suggesting about guilty until proven innocent. I want to get to the Renee Good case because I want you to give us the facts, and I want to provide some commentary about some of the U.S. attorneys that have resigned as a result of what they were being asked to do.
Yes. May Mr. Porter and may Miss Good rest. We had whistles and they had guns. I just want to begin the facts of the Renee Good case with that statement from her wife, Becca Good. As I've been sort of going down the rabbit hole of the facts of these cases, that those words um really resonate with me. But on January 7th, in the early morning hours, Renee Good had just dropped off one of her children to daycare. And the sort of now very widespread community symbol of ICE being in our community is the blowing of whistles. The minute we see convoys of unmarked vehicles coming into our communities, people have taken to whistles. And on January 7th, you can hear the whistles in this community blowing loudly. Miss Good was in the Miss Renee Good was in the driver's side, and she is essentially driving perpendicular to a block traffic. She's sitting there for a few minutes, and you see an ICE agent, who we now know is Agent Ross, go around to the vehicle of her car. You see Miss Good's wife, Becca Good, get out of the car. And for our community, I've watched this video backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards. I've also read eyewitness accounts. And essentially what is happening is the Agent Ross is looking at the license plate, or is doing what appears to be recording of the license plate. Miss Good's wife gets out of the car and says, our license plate is going to be the same when you come back and speak to us later. She's referencing the recent practice of ICE agents taking people's license plates and then going to their homes to interrogate them later on. The ICE agent grabs the handle of her vehicle, and you see her try to make a U-turn to get away. It is unclear from the video angle that I saw whether or not she clipped the agent, as many are saying. But what we do know for a fact, based on every video angle, is that Miss Good was trying to drive away. And you hear Miss Good's wife in the background of multiple videos saying, drive, baby, drive. As she's driving away, the ICE agent first lets off a shot through her windshield, and then at very close range through the driver's side window. Miss Good is shot at least 3 times and is ultimately killed. In other videos, you see ICE agents go to the driver's side of Miss Good, and in one of the videos, you hear someone say, fucking bitch. You then also hear a gentleman begging the agents to check her pulse. And then you hear another gentleman saying, I'm a doctor. And you hear the agent saying, we have doctors on staff. But one of the last things you see after Miss Good hits that hits that building or that pole, I apologize, my memory is escaping me. But you see her limp body being carried out of the car by her limbs and set down on the floor. Those are the facts as we know them right now. One of the other key points of note is that the ICE agent, Agent Ross, 6 months prior to him murdering Miss Good, he was engaged in another incident involving a vehicle with someone who was believed to be undocumented. And in that incident, he sustained, I believe, 13 stitches and a cut on his hand. And so those are the facts as we know them at this point. The agent has not been arrested yet. No charges have been brought. But I do want to note for the community members out there, J.D. Vance, I believe it was a few days ago, said that this agent is subject to absolute immunity. I do want to let this community know that whether or not charges are formally dropped, that statement is an inaccurate statement of the law. Will?
Thanks for breaking that down. And thank you for watching the video, right? That's not everybody is able to see these acts of violence being carried out. And there's a lot that, needs to be unpacked. Before I get into a couple of follow-ups, we had a couple of comments that I want to address real quick. Somebody's commented saying that there's this acceptance of hearsay as fact. And remember, hearsay is a very technical legal term. And when we're in court, we use an objection for hearsay. But this idea that the person who is offering us information in this moment is giving us information of somebody else. Somebody else said something, right? The other comment was questioning about where does this presumption of innocence come from, or this idea of innocent until proven guilty. We can trace this concept of innocent until proven guilty back to Roman law, and then Roman law influenced common law in England, and then the England common law influenced what our criminal legal system in the United States looks like. This idea of innocent until proven guilty rests on there being a presumption that we are all innocent. We're walking around our communities in an innocent way. And if we are going to be found or be determined guilty, the government has to prove that. There has to be a process in which they are proving that we are in fact guilty. So it means that we have this presumption of innocence. And that presumption is not taken away until the government satisfies that burden of proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's how we kind of get this concept of innocent until proven guilty in our American criminal legal system.
And I think that people are often surprised when they see how the theory of innocent until proven guilty comes about in practice, right? Oftentimes, someone will make an accusation against someone else, and with little to no investigation, that individual is arrested, right? But it's always interesting to see the juxtaposition between communities and how innocent until proven guilty plays out. Because while this is a universal concept in this country, that concept doesn't play out the same everywhere. Oftentimes, Black and brown people are handcuffed just because someone said something. There is little to no there's often little to no investigation, when someone who's Black or brown is accused.
For the folks who are tuning in, Portia Shafan and I have been to Montgomery, Alabama, a lot. And the Equal Justice Initiative has created so many historical sites and museums and places that I believe every American needs to visit. One of the sites that they have created is called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And it is a memorial that honors more than 4,073 individuals who are victims of racial terror lynchings. And when you go to this site, you are able to see these pillars hanging, and it lists the state and the county and the names of individuals who were the victims of racial terror lynchings. In addition to these pillars, they have plaques that give a little bit of a backstory in terms of why that person was killed. And they give you examples like this person complained about not getting enough change back from buying some goods at a store, or there were allegations that this person was trying to vote, or that this person was complaining that their brother had just been killed by two white men, right? And all of these, there's hundreds of examples, but in every single one, what we are seeing are this absence of due process, this absence of a presumption of innocence, this absence of actually giving someone to prove that they did not, in fact, commit the crime that they're being accused of committing. And so in the Black community, we have way too much familiarity with this notion of law enforcement just taking matters into their own hands. And we have way too many experiences and familiarity with people in the community, civilians being vigilantes and taking matters into their own hands. We were talking a little bit earlier about young people involved in the civil rights movement, right? Emmett Till was one of the young people who helped spark the civil rights movement because his mother had the courage to have his wake and his funeral be an open casket. And remember, his body was beaten and mutilated, and he was killed off of an allegation that he whistled at or made some comment towards a white woman in the store. So there's a moment that needs to be named right now in terms of this recall that a lot of Americans are having right now. Seeing these types of killings take place in 2026 are having echoes of types of killings that we have seen in America's past. And we have to call them out, right? They were just as harmful then as they are harmful now. And this notion that we are in a better time, that we have a criminal legal system, that we have due process, right? That idea, that vision of America is wholly absent when we are learning about and we're seeing incidents of the two individuals who were killed by ICE agents that we're talking about tonight.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about due process and this presumption of innocence, community members out there, I want you to think about sort of how easily or how slippery the slope gets, right? I want you to think about when you watch the news, right? And you see someone that's accused of a crime, right? Oftentimes, that first thought is, damn, they did it. Or we pass some type of judgment on the individual that we see doing the perp walk, right? And I want you to sort of notice that, right? Notice that sort of slippery slope of how we all, when it sounds good, talk about being law-abiding citizens and following the law and getting due process, but how easily we slip away from that just that fast.
Portia, you use this term perp walk. Can you remind us what that is?
Yes. So for the community, it's essentially when an individual is walked out of the precinct and into the vehicle that's ultimately going to take them to be processed. This is this type of showing on the news. It's called the perp walk because it's done very intentionally. When law enforcement often has an individual that has been accused of something that's been in their custody, is often like, look what we did, look what we can do, right? Look at us serving you. And again, right, it gives this air that the individual is guilty, right? Why would they be surrounded by so many police? Why would they be in cuffs? Because there is an assumption that the police investigated, that the police engaged in the proper policies, procedures, and processes. And I'm here to tell you right now, community, that is not the case.
And, perp is short for perpetrator. There's a suggestion that this is the person who committed the crime and we're holding them accountable. And we cannot ignore when we had lynchings in America and we had lynch mobs assembling to kill often Black men and to castrate them and to mutilate their bodies. And we've seen all those pictures of those crowds that have been assembled, and they're all pointing right at the body, right? And thinking through how we are going to use those memories of inspiring these very same moments of a perp walk that we see today, which you have indicated to us, these are orchestrated. These are detectives calling the media saying, hey, we're going to walk the man that we arrested for committing this crime out of our precinct into our squad car at 2 p.m. Come bring your cameras. That doesn't happen on a regular basis, right? This is all for show. And it's not for actually ensuring that the right person who had committed the crime is in fact the person who is going to be held accountable for the crime, right? Too often we have police officers who are too focused on closing a case instead of solving a crime. And this whole perception of, hey, we got them, check us out, look how good we are at doing our job, feeds into this notion of a false trust that they're trying to build within the American people to believe law enforcement when they say that they are doing their job. Well, guess what? This off-duty officer who killed Keith Porter wants you to believe that he was just doing his job. This ICE agent who killed Renee Good wants you to believe that he was just doing his job. And we have to call out the nonsense when we see it.
Absolutely. And, again, community out there, the thing that I want to remind y'all of is that, oftentimes it's them until it's us, right? when Renee Good dropped that baby off to school that morning, she had no idea that she would be all over the news within minutes, right? When Keith Porter was celebrating the end of something old and the beginning of something new, he had no idea that minutes later he would be all over the news. So as we are processing, the messages that we are receiving, let's not be so ready to believe that what we are seeing is what is people's actual experience. I want you to remember, right? I want you to just always think about somebody is somebody's mother, sister's, uncle's, aunt, cousin, brother, father, son, whatever, right? And, it could easily, we forget that one wrong turn, right, could be us. And so I just, when we're talking about due process and we're talking about, individuals doing things in our community, let's not forget it could easily be us. I know that we are socialized to believe, and it's really difficult for individuals who truly believe in law and order to process the vigilante of law enforcement. Right? We are born and raised to trust law enforcement. I mean, shit. Once Joe Rogan is like, damn, it's too real out here. Y'all ODing, as we say in New York, meaning y'all overdoing it. When you got Joe Rogan being like, nah, y'all fucking up the church's money, it's bad. It's bad, community.
I want to invite folks to share your thoughts, to give us some questions. And I want to end on a positive note, or not end, but to kind of transition to a positive note as it relates to news out of New Jersey, right? The governor, Murphy, signed an executive order providing and restoring jury rights to people with felony convictions. Now, when Portia and I first saw this, we were like, wait, executive order, shouldn't this be a legislative bill? Like, what is going on? But I just have to call out and be really excited about, as George W. Bush would say, the strategy behind this move. Tell us a little bit more about what happened.
It was so sexy. It was so sexy. So basically, I feel like Will, so for community members, Will and I talk about this stuff all the time. And so we just be inviting y'all in. It's really interesting because you actually helped me understand what he did. Because I was like, I was in civics class in elementary school learning, how a bill becomes a law. And I was like, wait a minute, he did some off the cuff stuff. And it looks like, did he use his clemency power?
He did. So the
so
strategic
so sexy.
The way that he was able to orchestrate this is he provided clemency relief for restoring jury rights to people with felony convictions who had a felony conviction before January 12, 2026. He restored just that small right. If you had that felony conviction before January 12, 2026, you are provided the right to serve on a jury. He didn't touch anything with the convictions. The records are still there, but he used his clemency power to restore that particular right. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to re-enfranchise about 300,000 people in New Jersey to be able to participate in the role of a jury in their communities, to participate in that conversation about who should or should not be held accountable for crimes that they have alleged to have been committed. But what this is also going to do, so that's win number one, right? Re-enfranchising about 300,000 people in New Jersey that have this right to serve on a jury. But the second thing that it's going to do is it is going to create pressure on the legislature to address whether or not they should be passing some legislation to prospectively restore jury rights to people with felony convictions. So it's really exciting news out of New Jersey to see how a governor is being really creative as he's in his last couple of weeks in office. And I hope that New Jersey can reconsider this legislation. They considered it in 2024, but it didn't gain any traction. And so hopefully this action by Governor Murphy, providing this clemency, relief, and restoring this jury right, can help create some momentum in the state.
I love a good mic drop exit. He said, let me go on down here and ruffle some feathers, before I dip. Well,
Absolutely.
we actually have a comment. We actually have a couple comments, but one of the first comments we have is, questions. Why are police allowed to notify press? And they're talking about regarding the perp walk. They're asking, or they're stating the accused doesn't have rights.
So this whole notion of the perp walk, the accused does have rights, right? But our rights are largely codified within our Constitution. And when we're thinking about right to privacy, that's codified in our Fourth Amendment. But what the Fourth Amendment provides for us is a protection against unreasonable searches and seizures without an actual warrant. There's this thing that's called an expectation of privacy. I don't have an expectation of privacy when I'm walking around in public. And so technically, if the police officers are transporting me in a public setting, like from the building of the police station across the sidewalk to the squad car, we're in public. I don't have an expectation of privacy. But the point that this question is raising is super valid. What happens to those cases where there is a quote unquote perp walk, and then it turns out this person was innocent?
Nothing happens to police. As a criminal defense attorney that goes through that incredibly often, and my clients are often, their faces are often on the news. And then, as a matter of fact, 2 months ago, my client had not just a perp walk, but his young face plastered all over the news, all over social media, the community calling for his murder because he was guilty until proven innocent. His case was dismissed months later. And you know what happened to the police? Nothing. Nothing. Not nothing.
I do want to give a shout out to the local paper here in town in New Orleans. It's called the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate, because these two papers merged. I want to say about 10 years ago, myself and about 9 other young Black men approached the editorial board of the paper, and we wanted to talk through with them their policy of posting people's mugshots, right? A mugshot is taken when you are arrested. That's the start of a case. That is not a conviction. Like, these pictures aren't taken after you've been convicted. And we hit them with a bunch of data in terms of how this creates biases, in terms of how this erodes presumptions of innocence. And they discontinued that policy. They stopped sharing all of these mugshots. Now, you can still find them when people have been convicted, and they use that mugshot, which I think is obviously not as harmful. But I want to say that there have been some media that have been responsive to these criticisms, but understand that this shot of a person take Luigi Mangione, for example, like, he flown in via helicopter and then taken to the squad car, like, all that was a glorified perp walk. So you don't necessarily have rights in those moments where you are being, out in the public, but understand that there is a way in which people are privately transported from the police station to the jail without these perp walks taking place. Another comment that I'll have you chime in on or react to if you have one. It says, when they start shooting blonde white women in broad daylight, it feels like a wrap for everyone else. Any response to that portion?
You ain't never no lie. You ain't never no lie. I was thinking the same thing. You took the words right out of my mouth. Transparency moment, community. When I'm of two minds, right? Sometimes I feel like, listen, Black people have been saying Black Lives Matter. People have been saying defund the police, let's reallocate resources. And many folks laughed at that notion, right? And so the only hope that I can have to come out of this is, oftentimes as human beings, it requires us to really go through the exact same thing someone has tried to get us to see. in order for us to really empathize with them, in order to really get it. And my hope is that not in sort of this pie in the sky way, but in real rooted and meaningful ways, these murders don't come without some type of trajectory or pendulum change and or shift. That is my hope. That is my prayer. But word to whoever made that comment. Word.
Portia Shafan, quick follow-up from another question. What gives you hope?
People. You know, I there's a comment that says shout out bravo to groups of, you know, strong Black men. And I want to say that what gives me hope are the grassroots organizations. That's what gives me hope. People power is really giving me hope. You know, although Miss Good and Mr. Porter, their intentions were not to be sort of one of the many faces of this movement. The battle cries that are happening around this country as a result of so many of the unfortunate things that are happening in these communities, these battle cries are giving me hope. What about you, Ray?
I'm going to echo that. I saw a video today of people organizing and demonstrating in Minneapolis, protesting the presence of ICE. And they were using one of my favorite powers. And the power that they were using was the power of music, particularly the power of song. They created this chant that incorporated the Attorney General's name. And it was just so creative. But simultaneously, I'm thinking about how cold it is right now in Minneapolis. I went to school at the University of Minnesota, and this is the time of year where they're in single digits, right? And so even in moments of severe cold weather, people are still out there making their objections to what's happening in our country known, and that definitely gives me hope. There's another question as it relates to, do we think that these practices can be formally changed? And I'm going to interpret that question to be talking about the perp walks and the use of mug shots. I think, you know, to get these types of practices to be changed, there has to be community opposition, right? So the group of young men here in New Orleans, like, we were just young folks in the city who were like, this is nonsense, right? There are so many examples of these people who were accused of a crime and then they're found not guilty or the case is dismissed, but their mugshot is still all in all these papers, and it's having an issue with their employment, right? And one of those individuals who was part of this group, his name is Royce DePlessis. He's a senator now, right? He passed one of the bills to help, you know, create some more protections about how mugshots are being used. So shout out to Senator DePlessis for his leadership on that front. Hopefully that was somewhat inspired by some of the work that we did, you know, having conversations with the Times-Picayune. So I think the ways in which we get these practices formally changed is by objecting to them, by having conversations with the editorial board, and by letting them know that these types of images, these types of perp walks are unnecessary to provide us with the news, right? The only justification that we were able to come up with for sharing somebody's mugshot is if they are actively posing a threat to the community, right? So if there's an instance of an active shooter that, you know, needs to be apprehended and the community is being asked to contribute to identifying where this person might be, like if there's an active threat, then that makes more sense. But if you're just talking about, you know, an everyday person who's arrested for simple theft from Walmart and you're blasting their mugshot, is that really necessary for us to know what that person looks like for stealing deodorant out of a convenience store?
Well, speaking of bravo to dope Black men, there is a wonderful comment in the chat that says, Will, you the best criminal defense lawyer. I know that's right, y'all. Please,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey. I love when you get your flowers, Will. I really, 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 really do. Will, there's one question that I want to ask you and then to potentially take us home. The one question we have is, can you sue police when or I guess maybe the media? I'm not sure who they're asking if we could sue, but I guess we can take it as a two-parter. Can you sue the media or police when you're found not guilty?
The
Or
answer,
the charges are dismissed.
yeah, typically not. So the way that police are protected and kind of shielded, there's this conversation about qualified immunity. But in addition to that, this is part of their investigation, right? And so they're just going to simply say,
Well, actually, we got clarification. It's can you sue for the perp walk if you're found not guilty or your case is dismissed?
Thanks for the clarification. And the answer is still no, unless there's something specifically about the perp walk where it's like extra inflammatory, or they're like holding pictures of dead bodies or something. Like it's super kind of libelous or slanderous depending on the medium. You're likely not going to be able to sue the police department for the perp walk. The media is just going to say, hey, we're just capturing the news as it's presented to us. And you'll also see in some of the media outlets that still do perp walks or use mugshots, there's always going to be either a small little disclaimer or a quick little one-liner in describing the person. That they'll use the term alleged. And when they use the term alleged, that's kind of the saving grace to prevent them from being sued, because that is a factual representation. This person is alleged to have committed said crime. Or the other thing that they'll do is they'll say all people are presumed innocent until proven guilty. But those little disclaimers don't carry the same weight of seeing these pictures or hearing these allegations that it has in terms of tarnishing people's reputations.
Absolutely. And we don't always read the small print.
You don't always read portion.
Huh? Right? Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. You ain't never no lie. Oh my goodness. I love that this live was both light and heavy at the same time. Heavy with the weight of the horrors that we are peppered with multiple times a day. And it now has become daily. Some instance of harm, some instance meant to instill fear, some cockamamie story or action that's happening. But I want to thank the community for being in community. Y'all could be anywhere else and y'all chose to be in community with us. I also not want to thank you. I don't want to just thank you all for showing up on our Instagram lives, for engaging us in the chat. I do want to thank you for bringing us in. I want to thank everyone for their donations. And, listen, Will and I are here. We are more than happy to come into your community and speak to your comrades. We are more than happy to come into your corporation and or office and speak to your colleagues. Bring us in. You could get all this razzle dazzle in person. Take us home, Will.
This Sunday, I had the privilege of being surrounded by so many amazing community organizations in New Orleans. And I think about the future of America, the future of this country, and the future for us as a people. It is going to come from organized community. It's going to come from the people. Portia Chiffon always reminds us about the power of our presence and the value of our voice. And that doesn't only apply to the jury box. We definitely want and need you all in our jury boxes as we're having conversations about people who might be unjustly arrested for crimes that they did not commit, that they are being overcharged for things perhaps that they simply did not do, or we see examples of the government abusing their power, and we are invoking the power of the people to put a check on a government that is abusing its own citizenry, right? We are going to get through this moment of America that we're in right now, and we're going to get through it together, right? There's an old African proverb that we're all familiar with. It says, if you wish to go quickly, go alone. If you wish to go far, go together. And we are here in this together. And I want to thank all of you for the support that you've been giving the Juror Project. We want to come and have these conversations with you all in person. We want to share our knowledge about how you can flex more power to make a justice system that is worthy of that name. Thank you for joining us for our first live of 2026. We have the second Tuesday, the second Wednesday of every month, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the next.
Good night. Good night, y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye.